welcome to the Committee of the Whole budget session for Wednesday, March 15th. I'll call the meeting to order and ask that people respond now to roll call, please. Thank you. Council is all of council is present with the exception of Councillors Killam and the Deputy Mayor. The Deputy Mayor is at meetings on the West Coast, so I think that we can take a motion to excuse her attendance. Councillor Killam, has he been in contact? No, he may well yet appear. So, and I believe he is on a leave of absence in any event. So. His attendance is gratuitous at this stage of the game. So I'd like a motion perhaps to excuse the attendance of the Deputy Mayor. Moved by Councillor Allen, seconded by Councillor Windsor. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, all in favor, please vote now, or otherwise, of course. It's unanimously passed. Thank you. Moving on to item 2, approval of the agenda. The agenda, of course, has been circulated, and it's basically a one-item agenda. Is to hear the proposed capital budget presentation from Mr. Livingston. Could I have a mover to accept the agenda? Councillor Granger, seconded by Councillor Meisner. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, all those in favor or otherwise, please vote now. And while we're doing that, item 3, of course, is the opportunity to indicate whether any individual councillor has a conflict of interest respecting any item on the agenda. I wouldn't expect it in this case, and I don't see anybody offering up. And the last motion is passed unanimously regarding the approval of the agenda. So that takes us to item 4, financial services. Mr. Livingston, when you're ready, sir. Councillor Armstrong?
I just have a quick question before Mr. Livingston gets started. And it's just something that I don't quite understand is why we're doing the capital budget first. I guess in my own mind, I'm thinking about, very simplistically, household budgets. Normally you determine how much you have to spend and how much you have going out in expenses and how much you have left over before you determine how much you're going to spend. So we don't know that. We don't know if these items are going to make it so that we have to do a tax increase. So I'm just curious to know why we're doing capital before we do operating.
I may not have a definitive answer to the question. I can suggest perhaps a little bit of logic to the flow outside of the fact that it is sort of the common practice. The capital budget itself is really only made up by a small part that actually impacts the current year general tax rate or current year rates. There are influences within, and there's a section of the book that talks about the influence that the capital and project budget would have on the general tax rate in the year. But things like the long-term debt financing used to cover the cost of projects don't have a direct influence necessarily on the current year operating budget, but would down the road when you get into the required principal and interest costs of that debt. So I guess I would put forward that sort of logic as to why it would make sense to bring forward the project budget now. The other thing is that any of these projects that find financing within the general operating fund or within our sewer rate, for instance, that is then also brought forward and contained in the operating budget. So you see it from that side once again when that budget comes forward in about a week's time. And then, of course, we have our deliberations the week after that, which encompasses the entirety of the budget. So I suppose I would just use that as the response.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. When you're ready, sir.
Perfect. So, yeah, here to present the proposed capital and project budget. So the capital and project budget for 22-23 includes total project costs of $29.2 million spread across 40 project sheets. 9 of those 40 projects have budgeted costs over $1 million and represent 22.6 of the total budget cost, about 77%. And throughout the presentation, you'll see highlighted projects where they make up one of those 9 significant projects. And throughout the presentation, you may hear me perhaps refer to the budget as just the capital budget, but note that that would just be shorthand because, of course, the capital budget does include projects that may not necessarily be completely capital in nature, but they either are closely tied to capital projects or were just viewed to be significant enough that they required attention on a standalone basis rather than just a simple inclusion with the broader operating budget presentation. So you will see a few projects that are sort of those standalone significant items. Some high-level budget perspectives, sort of just pulling from headings that you'll see in the budget document itself. The first one there being carryover. About $17.5 million of the capital and project budget represents carryover projects. The remaining 11.7 includes about 7.7 million worth of projects that are either ongoing projects or are continuation. For example, an ongoing project like the IT hardware evergreening or continuation like the municipal infrastructure development strategy. That means that just about around $4 million of the 23-24 capital and project budget represents new initiatives.
Sorry, I may well have missed the councillor's light on the same topic as was being discussed, so I apologize for interrupting you. Councillor Windsor?
Thank you. I just want to know, will you be taking questions along the way, particularly as we get into project by project, or?
Yeah, certainly.
Okay,
I was going to invite projects
Yeah.
on a project by project basis. I think that's the most efficient way for us to
Right.
sort of, rather than backtracking and wrapping our minds around.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
no problem. So yeah, I guess the point I was trying to make there was just the ratio of what is either carryover or has been sort of previously analyzed by council versus what would be considered brand new initiatives. The next point is around third-party financing, and that is somewhat tied into the carryover, especially in the context of the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program financing for a large portion of the projects contained in the 23-24 capital budget. Due to the timeline of ICIP approvals, there was some major projects that were put on hold because any spending on those projects would have been deemed as ineligible had they been expended before the effective date of those funding agreements. So it was the prudent course of action to hold those projects off, and now with the approvals in place, we can move forward with them in 23-24. The next title I have here is on capital reserves, and as discussed in the preview document that was recently circulated to council, a big part of this year's assessment lift is proposed to be directed towards capital reserves. Almost a year and a half ago now, council received a report about the status of the municipal sewer capital reserve. That report included some potential go-forward action items, and with the approval of the 22-23 budget, a plan was put in place to eliminate the shortfall that was identified in that capital reserve over a number of years. A similar process is being undertaken for the remaining asset classes, but until those processes are completed, I think right now it's a good time to take a step in the right direction and enhance the contributions to capital budgets to bring them closer in line with the policy recommended balance. You can expect to hear more about the plans in relation to the assessment lift and how the capital budgets fit within that plan as part of the operating budget presentation. The next item I have here is debt financing, and it's just so that I can make a quick reference that the vast majority of these project sheets that include debt financing in their financing plans, the assumption that was used was a 10-year term at 5.5% interest rate. And then the final point around the 22-23 operating surplus. So in accordance with the surplus allocation policy, the forecasted surplus for 22-23, which is right around the $2.1 million mark, will be first allocated to offset any of the projects that have long-term debt contemplated within their financing plans. And so you won't see that funding allocation reflected in the project sheets currently. They currently reflect debt utilization, but the plan is to assign that surplus to those projects sort of on a first-come, first-served basis until such time as it's completely utilized against the long-term debt planned in the capital budget. So I've got about 40 slides, one per project, and they're going to follow the format that you see on the screen here. First with the project name at the very top. In the top right, you'll see the project number. In the top left, you'll see the total gross budgeted costs for the project specific to the 23-24 fiscal period. Then just below that, you'll see the funding distribution across operations, so from either the general tax rate or the sewer rate, or even from the water utility rate. After that, there's a line for grants, utilization of capital reserves, utilization of operating reserves, long-term debt, and then other funding sources. And for the sake of this demonstration slide, I decided to use the distribution of project financing for the 23-24 budget overall. So I won't speak to it, but you can see it there on the screen. Just to the right of that, on each slide, you'll see some brief project information, key points, in some cases some financing information or other project explanation material. Of course, there's a limited amount of space to put information onto the slides themselves, so I just have the comment there at the bottom to see the project justification sheets for more in-depth detail on a project-by-project basis. So with that, I thought a good place to start would be with the Greenwood Water Utility. If you're planning to follow along with the pages in the capital budget book itself, Greenwood Water projects begin on page 61 of the agenda package, which is labeled page 58 of the budget document itself. The three projects within the Greenwood Water Utility are the water distribution system improvements, the water system equipment, and the production well. And as you can see, I've highlighted or boldened, I guess, the production well project to represent the fact that it is one of the 9 projects that have a budgeted cost exceeding $1 million. And it is by far the standout project contained within the water utility. So the first project I have here is the water distribution system improvements, with a total budgeted cost in 23-24 of $415,000. This is an ongoing utility project. It's normally budgeted closer to the $150,000 mark per year, and it's for annual upgrades to the utilities distribution system. The additional budget amounts in 23-24 and then also in 24-25 relate to installation of fire hydrants and valves across the utility. And this project will be financed from a combination of the utility rate in 23-24 and from some accumulated surplus. I'd be happy to take any questions on this project before moving on.
Okay, one question from Councillor Windsor. Just hold on, Councillor. I'm sorry, I haven't got your light on. There you go.
Yeah, I was trying to follow along, but is this the way you're going to present in different categories scattered?
Yeah, sorry, I am starting closer to the back of the project sheets, and I mentioned we're starting on page 61 of the agenda package. In the book itself, it's labeled as page 58.
61? Okay. Thank you.
Perfect. So I'll move on to our next project here, the water system equipment with a budgeted cost of $45,000. This is another ongoing program in the utility for the upgrades and replacements of equipment. Some purchases planned in 23-24 include UV disinfection components, monitoring equipment, and radio read water meters. And this project will be funded from the utility rate for 23-24. Any questions on that one?
Don't say any, carry on.
So moving on to the third and final project contained in the water utility. It's the production well with a total budgeted cost of $3,383,000. This project is for construction of a new independent water source for the utility, and it's a significant undertaking and may extend into fiscal 25-26. The production well project carried forward from 22-23. It was approved by the UARB in 22-23, then required some coordination with Nova Scotia Power and some internal assessment on final project options. The preliminary design work for this project has been awarded, and an options analysis has been received and is under consideration, which needs to be complete before moving on to the tender level design. This project is intended to consume nearly all of the water utilities' accumulated surplus, which has accumulated over a number of years. And as you can see on the slide, the amount on the ops reserve is the amount to be drawn from accumulated surplus, and that is made up with as well accessing long-term debt financing for the remaining portion of the project that will find its way into 23-24. You could take any questions on the production well.
No questions?
So that was the end of the water utility section, and there'll be a high-level summary at the very end of the presentation. You'll be able to see sort of the overall detail related to the utility on that slide. Excuse me. So the next section here is the regional sewer, and those pages you'll find at page 55 of the agenda package or 52 of the budget document. Just give you a moment to navigate there if that's where you're headed. All of the projects in this section have been discussed with the Regional Sewer Committee and have been recommended to the regional sewer partners, whether that's their council, village commission, or management. And I'm anticipating that there'll be a recommendation from the Regional Sewer Committee of their operating and capital budget to Municipal Council at their meeting tomorrow. The significant standout project for the regional sewer system is, of course, the sewage treatment plant aeration project, which also includes a significant amount of lagoon desludging, and it is highlighted here on the slide amongst the four total projects. indicating that it is another of the 9 projects with budgeted costs exceeding $1 million. The first project I have for you from the regional sewer system is regional sewer lines, with a budgeted cost of $100,000 in 23-24. The regional sewer lines project for this year includes engineering studies related to force mains running between RG7, which is around 916 West Main Street, through to Eves Hollow in Kentville. The project is intended to inform long-term capital planning for the regional system, and is budgeted to be financed from the regional sewer capital reserve. Could take any questions on that before moving on.
We have one question from Councillor Armstrong.
As I asked the other night, regional sewer is a partnership. So the monies that we're seeing here on these sheets, this is our portion.
No, this is the total cost that is then shared amongst the partners.
So where is their contribution shown in here as far as funding sources?
It's not demonstrated on the slide, and it's and I don't believe it is as broken out in the project sheet itself either. The logic behind that is the fact that the municipality owns all of the infrastructure contained within the regional system. More detail on the funding sources and the contributions from the partners to the regional system could be extracted from the regional budget itself.
Okay, thank you.
No other questions? I'm sorry, Councillor Windsor.
Thank you. Is the recovery shown elsewhere in the revenue stream, in the overall summation somewhere?
Yes, so the entirety of the regional system flows through into the municipal system, of course, when it comes to the total cost of operating sewer. And as part of that, we see the revenues coming through from the other partners.
Thank you.
Forms part of the municipal budget, yeah.
Thank you. No other questions.
So the next project I have for you is the regional STP aeration project, which was flagged as the significant project here. Total budgeted cost for 23-24 of $3,395,000. This project has actually been pre-approved by council, and the contract has been awarded. There would have been a series of meetings that took place with the regional committee in relation to this project, and then that would have culminated in a recommendation through to council, which led to the pre-approval of the budget amount. So the project covers the replacement of the aeration equipment and the desludging work in the lagoon cells 1 and 2 at the plant in New Minas. And so I'd be happy to take questions on this project, if there were any.
No questions.
The next project here is regional equipment. Total budgeted cost of $215,000. And it covers plans to purchase 2 generators for lift stations RG6 and 7, 3 flow meters at the treatment plant, SCADA monitoring equipment, and security equipment. The financing source is from the Regional Sewer Capital Reserve. Any questions on that one?
No questions.
The fourth and final project for the regional sewer system is the regional consulting studies. Total budget cost of $70,000, and it's to conduct a study related to inflow and infiltration of the system, and also will inform future capital planning for the regional system. It is also budgeted to be financed out of the regional capital reserve. And that's the end of the regional section. I'd be happy to take any questions on any of that.
No. One question from Councillor Armstrong.
I know I sound like a dog with a bone here, but when we talk about the regional STP aeration, it talks about debt of $2.3 million. And we carry all that debt.
Correct.
So none of the other partners sign on as, like, they don't guarantee their portion, do they?
That's not the case, correct? Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
So the next section I have for you here is the municipal sewer, so everything outside of the regional sewer system. It includes 8 project sheets, and it begins on page 47 of your agenda package. And I believe it should be labeled as page 44 of the capital budget document itself. So the 8 projects contained here are lift station replacements, sewer treatment plant infrastructure renewal, sewer collection line replacement, EPW equipment and occupational health and safety, SCADA system, Greenwood sewer extensions, municipal specification manual update, and laboratory building assessment. You'll notice 4 of those projects have been put in bold font, once again representing 4 projects of the 9 that have budgeted costs exceeding $1 million. And all 4 of those projects happen to be the projects that were submitted and approved for ICIP funding. The first project I have for you is the lift station replacements with a total budgeted cost of $2,984,000. As I mentioned, this is one of the carryover ICIP projects. It maintains the full scope submitted for funding, which was to begin in 2022-23 with lift stations AT3 and CB2, and was planned to continue into 23-24 with lift stations AD2 and CK4. The 23-24 budget amount also includes a smaller budget request related to upgrades across several other municipal lift stations for a cost of about $236,000, which actually is below the typical annual budget proposed on this project, because this is generally a recurring project to address the 72 municipal lift stations on a rolling basis. The financing structure is $1.6 million from ICIP, contribution from capital reserves, and then an additional amount of debt financing, $400,000. And I could take any questions you might have on this project.
One question from Councillor Windsor.
Just generally, ICIP, could you give us that?
Yeah, sorry, I gave it the full readout earlier. It's Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program.
Okay, great. No, I knew it was federal. And generally, did we get all the approvals all at one time? And when did we receive the approvals?
I personally haven't seen the contribution agreements myself. I'm not sure if we actually have them on record yet, but someone else would have to comment.
So I take it was late in the year and we could not go to tender.
Oh, I see your question. Yes, it was late. These projects weren't in a position to move forward at the time when
Okay.
funding was approved. Yeah.
Thank you.
No other questions?
The next project on the list is the sewer treatment plant infrastructure renewal with a budgeted cost of $3,910,000. Another of the carryover ICIP projects. It covers screening systems at the Aylesford, Canning, and Hants Border sewer treatment plants, as well as expansion of the Canning treatment plant. The 23-24 budget proposal includes amounts related to increased costs associated with those ICIP projects, and those are funded outside of the ICIP program. The project also includes non-ICIP work, such as construction of a new water supply well in Aylesford, design for upgrades of screening systems in Aldershot, Avonport, and Waterville, and lagoon desludging at the Greenwood Treatment Plant. The funding distribution, as shown on screen, is $1.9 million of ICIP funding, contribution from capital reserves of 1.4 million, and then final debt piece of $485,000. And are there any questions on the STP infrastructure renewal project?
No questions.
The next one I have is sewer collection line replacement with a total budget cost of $1,793,000. This is once again another of the carryover ICIP projects. It relates to upgrades of sewer lines on Chapel Road in cooperation with the Village of Canning, who are upgrading water lines at the same time. The project also covers the sewer line between 123 Mee Road and 1053 Governor Court, which includes utilization of Canada Community Building Funds, or CCBF. Finally, this project also includes an annual allotment of $50,000, which is intended to cover the cost of laterals extending out to individual property lines. The financing breakdown here is $1.5 million from ICIP and CCBF. The distinct amounts are detailed in the box to the right, and then capital reserves of $272,000. Could take any questions on the sewer line project.
No questions, thank you.
The next I have is the EPW equipment and occupational health and safety, budgeted cost of $55,000. This is an ongoing program for the purchase of equipment to support EPW operations and to maintain occupational health and safety requirements. In 23-24, some planned purchases include gas detection equipment, lockout or tagout kits, geotracing tabs, and other additional equipment needs as identified throughout the year. The funding is proposed from the capital reserve.
Thank you, no questions.
Next is the SCADA system. Total budget cost of $110,000. SCADA stands for Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition. And it's the system used to monitor the municipality's infrastructure. The carryover component of this project relates to the evaluation of our SCADA system against the state of the industry. The 23-24 budget proposal is consistent with the forecasted plan of this budget back in 22-23, and it relates to system upgrades as identified by the system evaluation. And I'll just note that the system upgrade costs have been scaled up from $50,000 to an annual estimate of $60,000. The system evaluation is carrying forward from funds that were set aside in operating reserves, and the system upgrades themselves would be funded from capital reserves.
Councillor Windsor?
Thank you. Just a couple of questions. Mike. One is, so we didn't expend anything this past year.
That's correct.
Yeah, and maybe through the mayor to staff. Is there some reason why we didn't get that project started this year?
I'm not completely certain. I would perhaps ask Director of Engineering Public Works if he wants to weigh in.
Mr. Quinn?
I thank you through you to Councillor Windsor. I think it's just somewhat the timing of other projects took priority, but also as well, it's like there was some discussion on how much further the extension of some of our fiber network was going to carry out, because some of the thought with, particularly with this SCADA upgrade, is that we would try to tie in more of our critical facilities and lift stations into the fiber network. So we're trying to work with IT to build some parameters around that, but certainly our plans very much go forward with this project this year.
Am I right in reading 60,000 a year for the duration of the capital plan? Is that ongoing cost, or what exactly is that? Through you, Mayor.
I mean, you're correct in seeing that that is the annual allotment. The exact plan in any given year, I think, is less certain until you approach that period, but perhaps the director can provide further commentary.
I think again through you to Councillor Windsor, I think we are expecting a certain amount of annual IT fee, but also as the new SCADA system is coming online, we are expecting to need to upgrade some of our equipment to meet the specifications of the new, particularly with the connections to the fiber. That'll have to be a little bit more firmed up as we get a better sense of what SCADA system we are going to go with. But so this is more of a placeholder for next year or so until we get those numbers firmed up. But based on some interim work that we've done, it seems to be a relatively reasonable placeholder for the time being.
Does that respond, Councillor?
Thank you, Mayor and staff.
Thank you. No other questions?
Terrific. So the next project I have for you here is the Greenwood Sewer Extensions. This is the final ICIP and carryover project in this section. It relates to extension of the wastewater infrastructure along Rock Notch Road in Greenwood. And the prior year proposed scope of project has been maintained and is carrying over into 23-24. The financing distribution is $1.4 million from ICIP funding, a small amount from capital reserves, and then the balance that isn't covered by ICIP will be financed through debt of about $533,000. Any questions on that project?
Thank you. No questions. We're waiting until you put us deeper in debt here, I think.
Sorry?
We're waiting until you put us deeper in debt before we have questions.
Fair enough. The next project I have here is the Municipal Specifications Manual Update. Proposed project cost of $100,000. This is a carryover project with an additional budget proposal of $80,000 to extend this work from the Municipal Specifications Manual to include the subdivision bylaw as well. These updates are intended to address low-impact development, climate change adaptation, accessibility, and active transportation. The carryover amount would be funded from the fund set aside in operating reserve in the prior year, and the incremental component funded from the sewer rate in the current year. Any questions on that project?
Questions? How is that operationalized, the manual update?
Perhaps I'll turn to
Mr. Quinn?
Sorry, through you. Guess I'm bringing this project about. It's basically it would be an RFP that be issued jointly between ourselves and planning on a scope, because part of the issue we flagged is that there's a number of the technical elements that are embedded within the subdivision bylaw. So part of the work is to effectively update both documents at the same time. So bylaw 60 as well as that, and to a certain degree try to untangle the two documents. So the bylaw is more of a governance document versus the municipal specs deals with all the technical all the technical stuff, basically.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hurdle?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, $100,000, that's an awfully round number. How did that number, how was that number arrived at?
That was at the recommendation of Engineering and Public Works, and I don't know if there's further commentary on that.
Say through you to Councillor Hurl, that's I would say we expect the number to be within that range, but based on our experience on comparable studies, we expect it to be within that range. It just depends on the particular capacity of the consultants as well.
You won't know the exact number until you put out the RFP.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Those are all the questions.
The next project I have here is the laboratory building assessment. Project cost of $25,000 in 23-24. There was an RFP for the lab building assessment, which has been awarded and is expected to be completed in the early part of 23-24. And you can expect that a future project sheet will come forward that will contain any necessary work identified as a result of that assessment. The project financing is proposed to come from the funds set aside in operating reserve as part of the carryover process. Are there any questions on that particular project sheet?
Oh, thank you. No questions.
So that's actually the end of the municipal sewer section and leads us into the municipal infrastructure section. Believe that if you were to navigate to page 20 of the agenda package or page 17 of the budget document itself, you would find the first of the project sheets that I'll be discussing. But basically this covers 10 project sheets across 4 segments, being information technology with 5 projects, municipal facilities with 2, roads and sidewalks with another 2, and then parks and recreation with 1 project. The first segment that I will address is the information technology, 5 project sheets containing network upgrades, hardware evergreening, the accounting and asset management software, fiber/wireless hybrid connectivity, and the Aylesford broadband pilot. So the first of those projects, the network upgrades, which is an ongoing program to replace and add system and network components. Some planned purchases in 2023-24 include firewalls, backup storage, and migration of the MS Exchange over to MS Exchange Online. This program is routinely funded from IT capital reserves, and the IT reserve is funded slightly differently than other capital reserves. Instead of being purely amortization based, we take an approach that's slightly better aligned with the replacement cost of the assets involved. Currently, the approach is to look at the departments and get the FTE count across each department, and then multiply that by a per person cost for IT upgrades. For example, it wouldn't be covered in this project sheet, but any computers and those types of things that are sort of then broken down on an FTE basis. So just wanted to highlight that sort of nuanced difference in the way that the IT capital reserve is funded. So this program is proposed to be funded from that IT capital reserve, and I can take questions on this one.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong has a question.
Thank you. Why is the $17,815 not a carryover? Is it anticipated that this is going to be finished before the end of the year? Or shouldn't it have that? Should that have been carried over?
Just take a quick look at what exactly you're referencing. Oh, right. So what you're seeing there, you're looking at the forecasted remaining balance of the prior year project, and yes, the way that this project rolls from year to year, if there is carryover activity, then we would pull that forward and include it in the 23-24 budget. That would represent project savings, and then we simply rebudget for any purchases that we're planning to make in the coming fiscal period. mainly due because we're just going to be drawing from the IT reserve either way, whether we say that we're carrying over the withdrawal from IT reserve. The only thing that would be doing is reducing the new draw from the same reserve. So rather than getting too concerned with the distinction of carryover on this project, we budget a distinct set of activity in the new fiscal period, and the funding source is the same.
So you only use carryover when the project's not complete? That remaining budget is just unspent money that wasn't used?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. No other questions?
The next project I have here for you is hardware evergreening with a budgeted cost of $69,000. This is also an ongoing program funded from the IT Capital Reserve. Some planned purchases in 23-24 include 6 tough books, 4 notebook computers, 18 standard computers, although that could be from a combination of, sorry, my notes here say a combination of new and replacement. But the 18 computers very well could be laptops or desktop computers, depending on what the exact needs are. 10 monitors and a digital camera are included in planned purchases, and like I mentioned, the proposed funding source is the IT Capital Reserve. Any questions on that project?
Thank you. No questions.
Next here is the accounting and asset management software, a budgeted cost of $294,000. This is a carryover project related to the replacement of the existing asset management and accounting software packages. The asset management software was selected and implemented in 22-23 and is to be followed by the accounting software in 23-24 with some additional planned work to connect the two programs to whatever degree possible in the following year. And the funding source proposed is to continue to pull from the IT reserve as would have been specified in the prior year. And
Thank
I
you.
can take
Councillor
questions.
Windsor has a question.
Thank you, Mayor. And this, Mike, looks like there was no expenditure at all in the current fiscal year, past fiscal year, 21 or 22, 23.
Right. And so I believe what you're seeing there may be due to the nature of the cost associated with the asset management software. It was much less upfront cost of software and instead is more of a recurring subscription cost, I believe. Further details on exactly how that sort of played out, I would ask to be provided by our manager of information technology. But that's correct. That budget will be carried forward and available for the work on the accounting software.
So it was carried forward in 21-2 and now 22-3 and or 23-4 into 23.
Yes, and I think you can look at the project number for this particular project sheet, it being 16-1103. I wasn't around at the time, but that signifies to me that the first time that this project was put forward to council was in 2016. So it is
At
fairly
least,
long run.
yeah, I was going to say about 8 years. And so that's why, year over year it comes in, well, in two separate projects initially, asset management and accounting, and I don't know which one was in the system first, but it is like 8 years or so. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Yeah, and my recollection is that we got more mileage out of what we had than we anticipated we would get, and we were anxious that both programs were able to speak to one another when they were finally installed. So it's good to see us at this point. Thank you. No other questions.
The next project here on the screen is the fiber/wireless hybrid connectivity for a budgeted cost in 23-24 of $277,000. This is also an ongoing program to connect municipal properties and assets to the fiber network. And connection of the Aylesford water and wastewater plants will carry over from 22-23 to 23-24. As well, a connection to the new Greenwood well field is also proposed for 23-24. The project financing is proposed to come from a combination of IT capital reserves and debt financing, $32,000 and $245,000 respectively. Can take any questions on that project.
No, thank you.
Next is the Aylesford broadband pilot, $180,000. This pilot program would see the connection of the Aylesford water and wastewater treatment facilities extended to over 500 homes and businesses in the surrounding area. Implementation would follow identification of an internet service provider, partner, and after a survey of area customers and the firming up of the pilot feasibility. Can take any, the proposed to be financed with debt.
Thank you. No questions.
So that's the end of the IT section of the municipal infrastructure, and now we move on to the municipal facilities. These project sheets should immediately follow the IT sheets in your agenda packages and the budget book. The two projects are the municipal complex accessibility and the Waterville warehouse upgrades. First of the two is the municipal complex accessibility. $127,000 proposed budget for 23-24. This project addresses new provincial accessibility legislation specifically related to the municipal complex. Installation of automatic doors in the administration building is the carryover activity from 22-23. And additional project activity contemplated for 23-24 includes improvements to walkways here in council chambers, as well as improved accessibility elements for the speaker's podium. The project financing comes from a small amount from the from general operations, from the tax rate, grants, accessibility grants of $53,000, and then from capital reserves in the amount of $65,000. Can take any questions you may have on that.
No questions, thank you.
Next is the Waterville warehouse upgrades, $200,000 budgeted for 23-24. This project was initially identified in the 5-year capital forecast of the 22-23 capital and project budget. The project activity includes construction of a gravel pad and installation of fencing and gates for 23-24, and in 24-25, climate control system and installation will be added to the building along with security and access control equipment. This project is proposed to be financed with debt of $200,000 and would be a candidate for coverage from the forecasted surplus for 22-23. As I had mentioned earlier in my presentation. You can take questions on this one.
Thank you. Councillor Windsor has a question.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Mike. We're contemplating insulating the building.
Correct, that was in the project scope.
Is it needed?
That was also part of it, the climate control system to be added in 24-25.
Just wondering why we need a warehouse heated.
I don't have the exact answer to that.
Mr.
Maybe.
Quinn may have the exact answer to that.
Excuse me, through you, Mayor, Councilor Windsor. I think it's just some more, particularly the electronic equipment it's not going to be heated to say necessarily standard of what for human occupancy per se, but there is certainly some gear and equipment that would be advantageous to keep it at least somewhat above zero. So it'll be more of a, to make it more of a somewhat cold storage, but it's not it's certainly not an exhaustive heating system or effort that is being contemplated under this project.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Scott and Mike.
No other questions?
So those are our two municipal facilities projects. The next is roads and sidewalks, and you can see here in the bold text, the pedestrian infrastructure is another of the 9 projects with a budgeted cost in excess of $1 million. The other project is the municipal road remediation project. Once again, these are just a continuation on through the budget book, so you should find them on the sub pages following the facilities pages. So the first project I have for you is pedestrian infrastructure with a budgeted cost of $2,680,000. This is an ongoing program to construct sidewalks from the sidewalk priority list. In 23-24, the Scott Drive Phase 2 and West Kings High School sidewalks will be completed. This is the carryover activity. And then in addition to that, the design for the Horton High School sidewalk and one other sidewalk from the priority list will be completed. And the plan there is to provide some program flexibility in the event that there may be some project delay in relation to the rather substantial Horton High School sidewalk. The project is proposed to be funded with a small amount from the general tax rate, grants of $1.3 million, capital reserves of $1.1 million, and debt of $200,000, which is tied into the design of the Horton sidewalk. I can take any questions you may have on the sidewalk projects.
No questions, thank you.
The next project I have is the municipal road remediation at a budgeted cost of $100,000. This is another ongoing remediation program for the approximately 25 kilometers of municipal subdivision roads. The work is expected to extend the useful life of pavement by somewhere around 3 to 5 years at a fraction of the cost per kilometer per year of a full-scale resurfacing. So it moves that large capital expenditure out by several years in a really cost-effective way. The budget is proposed to be financed from the road capital reserve, road and sidewalk capital reserve. Any questions on that project?
Thank you, no questions.
All right, that leads us into the final section from the municipal infrastructure category. One project, park facility upgrades for $812,000. It's also an ongoing program to maintain and upgrade park facilities. The ongoing program budget amount is typically quite smaller. However, carrying over to 23-24 is the Aylesford Lake Washroom Facility project. In 22-23, the project financing plan was supplemented with a grant from ACOA, and council provided budget pre-approval to enable access to those funds. And so the pre-approved funding distribution going into the 23-24 capital budget is $65,000 from operations, 154 representing remaining amount of grant funds yet to be utilized of the total 250 that were approved by ACOA, and then debt of $593,000. I can take questions you may have on the park facility upgrades.
I see none, thank you. That project for information, I'm sure everybody perhaps already realizes, but I'll just reiterate it. Looks like it's on track for being ready for the opening of the beach, because I'm seeing progress accounts going by on a regular basis now. Thank you.
So that leads us to the end of the municipal infrastructure segment. And now we get into the special projects, of which there are 15, and rather than putting 15 project names on a slide that you wouldn't be able to read, I just put some really high-level bullet points that, these are the projects that really look to deliver on the key strategic priorities in the strategic plan of council. There's a very broad type and nature of projects included in this section, and also a very broad range of costs. The unfortunate thing of not listing the projects here is I wasn't able to bold the few titles of projects that were in excess of $1 million, but there are a couple in here. And I believe that should be just a continuation in the books, but if you look to page 30 of the agenda package or page 27 of the document itself, you should find yourself at the wind project with a budgeted cost of $168,000. This is a 100% carryover project. It's been on hold. The project contemplates consulting and placement of meteorological towers to collect data and evaluate feasibility of a wind farm, and trying to find a way to resolve an issue with DND and some radar concerns. There may have to be some alternative options explored for this project, but currently we have the full scope of the project funds carrying over from the operating reserve where the originally budgeted amounts were set aside. Happy to take any
Councillor
questions.
Windsor has a question.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Mike. And my question is with respect to our expectation here now, or where we see the federal government at. Do we see this as still a good candidate project, or are we just about to an impasse there? What's the reading of the, because I've heard some rumblings that it's likely not to get the blessing of DND. So I'm just wondering, for those who are close to it, if you've got a reading to share.
The answer is, and I think I mentioned this at a previous council meeting, we're waiting on a number of responses from DND on a number of projects that we have going, the freeing up of the land in the Greenwood area, the piece of land in Aldershot, the wind farm project, and so on. No one has said no, specific to the wind project. No one has said no. They've in fact said, we're working on the issue. But D&D tends to hold things very close to their chest. They're not very sharing, and they don't move at anything other than a glacial pace. Although it seems my responses at a previous meeting elicited a rapid response from them, just to indicate that it was still on their, if you'll pardon the pun, radar. So. All that said, we are also exploring alternative options as far as available sites are concerned. Does that respond, Councillor?
Thank you.
Okay. No other questions?
The next project sheet I have for you is in relation to the light manufacturing park development study. Total budgeted cost of $125,000. This would cover a detailed design of the internal road alignment, lot layout and servicing, market analysis, and additional environmental studies related to wetland alteration, which is all to carry over from 22, 23 to 23, 24. An economic impact study by the Annapolis Valley First Nation and additional work in regards to the local highway interchange will also carry over to 23, 24. And for now, a placeholder estimate for construction has been included in the 5-year capital forecast as project number 23-3402, which is on the next page of the agenda package. It should be page 32 of the agenda or page 29 of the document. But the study work is proposed to be financed from operating reserves where previous year funding has been set aside for this project. Happy to take questions on it.
Excuse me, I hit my mic. No questions on this slide, thanks.
So you'll want to skip a page past the construction placeholder project into the the Water Village of Kingston project sheet with a budgeted cost of $96,000. This project has began with a search for a viable well field based on the request of the Village of Kingston to establish a municipal water service within the village. More recently, the municipality has examined the feasibility of expanding the Greenwood water utility into Kingston. For now, this project is on hold pending the results of the village's application into the ICIP funding program. The proposed financing structure for this particular bit of work would be a split between municipal resource being the operating reserve where funds have been set aside for this project, and then other revenue, which would be a contribution from the village. But like I said, this is on hold and is somewhat preliminary at this point, I think. But any questions on that?
No questions, thank you.
Next is the traffic and pedestrian study for Colebrook Village Park Drive. Budgeted cost of $50,000. This is a carryover project, or sorry, it's sort of more of a continuation project. This work was, I believe, forecasted for this current period in the 22-23 capital and project budgets, but there's a bit of a change in plans, and the original plans were to conduct a traffic and pedestrian study to develop improvements to the intersection of Highway 1 and Colebrook Village Park Drive. However, it'll be a number of years before the province is in a position to examine this area. And so in the meantime, we'll consider what interim improvement measures could be made in that area. The original budget is proposed to cover those interim measures, the 50,000 you see on the screen, and the original scope of work will be rebudgeted in a future period once the province is prepared to proceed in this area. And so, as you can see, the funding is proposed to come from the operating reserve where funds had been set aside for this initiative, and I'm happy to take questions on it.
Thank you. Councillor Windsor has a question.
Thank you, Mayor. So I presume then the work that we do would be limited scope and not getting into the major infrastructure. Their letter would be provincial.
That is my understanding. You could perhaps get a more detailed response out of the Director of Engineering Public Works.
Mr. Quinn?
Thank you. Through to Councillor Windsor, yes, I think in particular there's been a couple discussions with Nova Scotia Public Works lately that may provide a bit of a path forward. I think we would certainly want to try to, I think the thinking in my head right at the moment is that there may be ways to do I'll say for lack of a better word, for the moment is sort of a temporary sidewalk, and there may be some other things to keep out of that we don't sink too much money in for a bunch of infrastructure that's going to get ripped up in say 10 years. But there may be a couple areas that we may be able to do a couple other things, but they'll take a little bit more exploring on that, just given how recent the information's been. So.
Thank you, Mayor and staff.
Councillor Hurd?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you to Mr. Quinn. Going off on Councillor Windsor's comments or questions, would some of those improvements look at the issues with essentially the dirt path that runs through there, as well some of the safety issues related to not having access to a traffic light or pedestrian light or crosswalk?
Through to Councillor Hurdle, I think there'd be some, as I say, I haven't really had much chance to really sketch in much detail, but yes, I think to make it a little slightly more formal than what's there now, but not a particularly exhaustive one. I think particularly where the clarification on how the interchange infrastructure plays into that. That's why this has come forward now, is that we've gotten a lot more clarity on that particular point in the last week or so. So I would say there's a workaround that we can look at doing something as an interim step until the rest of the upgrades to the interchange are completed.
Thank you. I'm very excited for this project going forward.
Thanks, Councillor Hurdle. No other questions.
The next project I have for you is the Regional Recreation Facility Study, $50,000 budgeted for 23-24. Phase 1 of the Regional Recreation Facility Study has been completed, and a need for further consulting work has been identified to collect additional information that will bridge Phase 1 into Phase 2, which would be preliminary design work. Budget savings from the Phase 1 project will be used to fund a portion of the incremental consulting work considered, and the remaining portion will come from the general tax rate. And you can see on the screen from operations, we're looking at $11,000, and from the carryover amount in the operating reserve, $38,000. Can take any questions that may be.
No questions, thank you.
Next is the polling district review. The majority of the work on this project was completed in 22-23, but the related UARB hearing won't take place until mid-April 2023. It may result in a small amount of additional project spending. So for that purpose, we've decided to carry over the remaining funds that were contemplated for this project, and they'll be put into operating reserve and drawn out as needed. Don't anticipate the full cost need of the amount that we're seeing here, but wanted to make it available in the event that it was required.
Thank you. No questions.
Next is municipal accessibility upgrades. This is an ongoing program that will support delivery of accessibility infrastructure once provincial regulations are put in place. For now, the project is proposed to utilize long-term debt for the full project cost, budgeted at $175,000. However, something that we're considering moving forward is funding this project out of the general rate and setting aside any unused funds in a reserve specific to accessibility upgrades so that they can be accessed in a future year to deliver on perhaps multiple projects or larger scale projects. But for now, we've tagged it for debt financing, and is very much just a placeholder until we know a little bit more about the regulations.
Thank you. Councillor Windsor has a question.
Thank you. When I look across the page, I see this capital plan anticipates $875,000. I'm just wondering what kind of work do we anticipate doing to put that much money in the capital plan? I know there's new rules. I know there's issues. I know that we will be short of the standard when those new rules are in place. I'm just wondering what are some of the upgrades being contemplated at this time to suggest a budget of 875,000 over 5 years?
I don't have an answer to that question. I don't know if perhaps one of our directors has more to contribute.
Does anybody wish to contribute? Ms. Jabrick?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. While I was not a part of coming up with the number, what would have went into that discussion would have been its only built environment that would be triggering these upgrades. So whether that's any of our structures, sidewalks, anything that doesn't meet fully accessible is going to be triggered. So additional cost is certainly anticipated, but as Mike has said, the province hasn't rolled out the regulations, so this is more anticipation of what that cost would be.
Does that respond, Councillor?
It's okay for now.
Thank you. Not money spent and not in this year's budget, but one can anticipate a lot of that type of thing. Sidewalk cutouts, building access, that kind of thing. No more questions, thanks.
The next project is the active transportation infrastructure with a budgeted cost of $730,000. The carryover for this project is made up of initiatives that were submitted to the Federal Active Transportation Fund, were approved for funding, and then later pre-approved for carryover into 23-24 by Municipal Council. In addition to the items covered by the AT Fund, this project also includes extension of the Harvest Moon Trail easterly towards Wharf Road and Horton Landing. The trail extension is budgeted at 30/60 between grants and long-term debt. However, we're hoping to access a larger share of grant funding to offset the debt requirement on that trail extension. Beyond these projects, this will be an ongoing project for AT projects recommended by the Active Transportation Plan, and the financing distribution of the $730,000 is $414,000 from grants, operating reserves of $45,000, and then debt of $271,000. Happy to take questions on that.
Thank you. A question from Councillor Windsor.
Thank you. And I'm not sure, Mr. Mayor, through you, if my answer lies elsewhere, but my question was with respect to, we had just had a letter from the minister, a provincial minister, agreeing to a transportation or traffic study for Greenwich, which would include active and trails, and as well as some of the road issues. Where would that fit? Would it fit under this particular item, or is there somewhere else where that fits? Will it be specifically listed as a project, or what's the plan for it?
I'm not familiar with the initiative, so
No, it would be through the mayor to our director, EPW.
Director Quinn?
Yes, thank you, through your mayor, to Councillor Windsor. Yes, this is a more recent one. I think given the dollar value that I think we agreed upon with the representatives from Nova Scotia Public Works, I think we're just planning to fund that through our outside engineering budget for the upcoming year for now.
Okay, so there won't be a separate budget established for that, but you have the budget to cover?
Not at this time. I think the value of the study wasn't really large enough to warrant it necessarily. We think we can just handle it within there, but if there's any work that comes out of that study, then certainly individual project sheets will be coming from that. But
Yeah, no, the minister was agreeing to a study, so I guess the presumption is that we'll be moving forward and we would have a cost component to cover.
Yeah.
And I know there was a list of studies on page 8, a list of work on page I think. And, yeah, it would have been good to seen it in there specifically. It was a specific project.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. No more questions.
The next project is the IMSA pilot with a budgeted cost of $391,000. The IMSA pilot, or more commonly referred to as the interim IMSA, began in 22-23 and will run for a 2-year term. The interim IMSA's most significant undertakings relate to King's Transit and Valley Waste, and Council recently received budget presentations for each of these organizations from the IMSA consultants. This project sheet represents the total gross cost of the interim IMSA, with the amount on the operations line representing the King's share, the amount on the other line representing the share of other municipal units, and then the overall grant funding available for the IMSA for study work at King's Transit Authority on the grants line. So the distribution there, operations of 144,000 King's share, 91,000 contribution towards the KTA studies, and then other 156,000 representing the other municipal shares. You can take any questions on the IMSA pilot.
I see no questions. Thank you.
Next is municipal infrastructure delivery or development strategy. Total budgeted cost in 23-24 of $505,000. This project is tied directly into motions adopted by Council on January 18th, 2022 as part of deliberations regarding housing and the municipality's role in supporting development, primarily through the provision of central services. A portion of the project activity from 22-23 will carry over and will be combined with the planned continuation of the project into 23-24. And as per the previous decision of Council, this project's been funded from funds remaining in the COVID-19 reserve, which is demonstrated on the screen.
Thank you. Councillor Windsor has a question.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you maybe to Mr. Quinn. We refer to 9 projects there. Could you tell us what those 9 projects are?
Let's see, I think those are, through you, Mayor, to Councillor Windsor, I think those are stemming out of the motions from last year for housing initiatives. So I think there was, if I recall correctly, there was a couple of engineering studies that were originally tagged out of that to, I think one of them was for Saraville, one for Colebrook. There was several initiatives with there. I'll have to go back and refresh my memory on the exact projects, because there was several, I think, few engineering ones, not quite engineering related, but I can go back and take a look real quick. And
Perhaps you could get to the councillor with a copy to us when you have an opportunity.
Certainly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No other questions?
The next project is asset management / capacity building study. Total budget of $400,000 in 23-24. And this project covers commissioning of an asset management / capacity building study to assess several areas relative to the maintenance and potential growth of critical infrastructure. And it's intended to extend out to villages as well as municipal infrastructure. The proposed budget for 23-24 includes an additional $80,000 to also be funded from CCBF, Canada Community Building Fund, to cover anticipated cost increases for the project. And it is carrying over from fiscal 22-23, 100% funded from CCBF. Take any
No questions. Thank you.
So next I have a new project sheet for you. It's the rain gauges and wind monitoring with a total budgeted cost of $550,000. It looks to complete a technical study to identify locations and acquire appropriate weather monitoring equipment throughout the municipality. The study findings will be used to inform equipment installations at municipal facilities, which will be used to inform capital replacements and operational profiles during things like storm events. The total project cost is proposed to be financed through long-term debt. Be happy to take questions on the matter.
Thank you. Councillor Windsor has a question.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just wondering, at this point in time, what do we expect to achieve by putting automated weather observation stations in certain locations? How would it help? And again, this is to our through you, Mayor, to our Director of Engineering and Public Works.
Thank you. Mr. Quinn, can you respond?
Certainly through you to Councillor Windsor. I think the intent was that these would be mainly placed at our water and sewer treatment facilities, and particularly with their particular operations and given some of the climatic impacts we've been seeing, particularly as of late, we'd like to try to correlate some of those operational parameters around with what the weather is, and also as well as go forward, it's like to be able to better predict when the conditions are changing and where we may have to make adjustments to our operational profile at those facilities. And also there's other information in terms of, say, winter maintenance with roads and that we can correlate and maybe better tune some of our responses. And I think what we've been finding is that the microclimates at these particular facilities do vary a fair bit. So what may be happening in one end of the county may not necessarily be affecting necessarily at the other. So basically this is hopefully a sort of a way to better gauge and calibrate our operations, particularly at our treatment facilities, to avoid some of the issues we've been having with the last couple of years, but also as well as we're seeing, with the weather changing, we're certainly seeing how that is changing how the way we operate, because we're having to respond to some of those, particularly weather precipitation has changed significantly in the last couple of years in particular. And based on all the predictions, that's continued to expect to go forward. So.
Does that respond, Councillor?
I don't understand how it's going to change things and make the system better. We have the general weather observation system. I know an AWA system, likely just a basic, is going to be $60,000 or so. Yeah, I'm just not sure why we feel the need to do this for $500,000 plus. Anyway, that's my question.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Mr. Quinn. No more questions.
Next project is a semi-new project sheet, municipal fleet and EV charging stations. It's a combination of some legacy project sheets that would have seen vehicle replacements and additions to the fleet across a couple different departments, and so we're centralizing it into just a single project, and it now includes the addition of electric vehicle charging stations to enable the acquisition of electric vehicles as recommended in the report that was received previously. The total project cost budgeted for 23-24 is $1,345,000, and the carryover project scope includes 2 vehicle purchases, and proposed in 23-24 are an additional 5 vehicles. So across that 7 vehicle total, we're looking at 4 that represent replacements of the existing fleet, and 3 vehicles that represent new additions. And exact details on those replacements and additions are explained in the project sheet. And so then, as I mentioned, in addition to that, we're looking at the EV charging stations, and that makes up $900,000 of the budget that you're seeing on the screen now, and is contemplated to access grant funding for the total amount that you see on that line of $540,000. In 22-23, Council made a decision to defer the purchase of a 5-ton truck and to reallocate the budget for that particular purchase towards EV charging stations. So there was $300,000 of debt financing that was repurposed for the charging stations, and then there was required to be another $60,000, which you see on the operations line, to sort of balance out what we've seen for what we're anticipating to be the cost of delivering those charging stations. So then the remainder of the costs coming from vehicle reserves, vehicle capital reserves, and debt financing will cover the addition of the 7 vehicles. And I'd be happy to take any questions you might have on the vehicle and charging stations.
Thank you. No questions.
Quickly tag that this is one of the 9 projects with a budgeted cost of over $1 million. Next, I have the municipal entrance signage budgeted cost of $42,000. This project will update municipal entrance signage at the Kings Hants and Kings Annapolis borders along Highway 101. Graphic designer would be engaged to design the signage, and arrangements will be made with the Nova Scotia Department of Public Works sign shop to print, mount, and install the new signs. The project budget is proposed to be financed from the Economic Development Reserve, which has a particular component carved out in relation to municipal branding. So this would be accessing a component of that specific reserve. Happy to take any questions you might have on the signage.
No questions. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. Councillor Meisner.
I know that we went through a rebranding process, but I'm just wondering if these highway signs, if there will be any collaboration or connection with our First Nation community in order to incorporate them into the signage as well when we are putting it out. I know Annapolis has like Jalasi on their sign and things like that, so I'm just wondering if that will be a component of these signs as well. You might not know that, but just wondering if that would be a part of the project.
Yes, I don't have the answer, and I don't know if we're far enough along the process to know the answer, but something to consider certainly.
I don't think the councillor anticipated that you would, but you wanted to raise it as an issue, and that it's a good point of collaboration for the county with the First Nations folks. Okay, there are no other questions.
So our final project sheet for the day, Meadowview Solar Garden, budgeted cost of $1,066,000 in 23-24, although the total modeled project costs are closer to $17,159,000, and that is extracted from the report from our consultant. But this project would be related to the development of the solar garden in Meadowview. We are currently awaiting regulations from the province to enable the project, and the final funding structure is yet to be determined. And this project is intended to be advanced through partnership with Annapolis Valley First Nations and the Gloos-Kap First Nation. For now, I've represented the project as funding from grants and debt, but That is very much just placeholder at this point. There's a great deal to work out before we have a full sense of exactly how this project will be delivered. And that would be brought forward to council at a future time. The project sheet itself, you would see in the impact on operations, pulls from the consultant's report around the project's operations and I guess earnings potential and feasibility. So you can take a look at that, and that's indicated in the second year of the project sheet. But happy to take any questions on this particular project.
There's a question from Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. The 533 that you're showing under grants, is that money we have, money we're going to apply for, money that we might not be approved for?
It's very much up in the air. It's my understanding the 50% allocation to grants is simply in line with what was contemplated in the consultant's report and is part of establishing project feasibility. So it's not secured, it's what we need to seek out.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Windsor.
Thank you. I had a general comment, Mayor, or question. And it's with respect to, as you know, we voted to approve the secondary plan for New Minas. And I've been in conversation with the CAO on follow-on initiatives that could continue out of that, and the potential candidates for that could emanate for federal provincial funding. Do we have anything, and maybe this is to our director, EPW, do we have something in our plans to do subsequent work, like highway line or connector road alignment and the like, and water and sewer infrastructure, water tank placement? There were several things that we had talked about, possibilities to how.
Mr. Quinn, do you have a comment regarding whether or not those are considerations for this year's budget?
I think part of the issue is that most of that infrastructure will be owned by the village, so that would have to be a discussion with them, so I'm not entirely sure where they're at. So any water sewer for South, so any of those discussions will have to involve the village, as they would end up being the owner, most likely beyond that, so.
So those discussions need to be had.
Correct.
And have not yet been had.
Correct.
Thank you. Does that
But,
respond, Councillor?
Yeah, we're putting together a plan, and we are responsible for planning, so I would think that we would have something in the budget that identifies that, and certainly, and as we hear daily of federal infrastructure funding towards objectives that that this area south of 101 can meet, there's opportunities that we need to pursue, and we need to be preparing ourselves. I am disappointed that we are not showing anything in the plan to pursue this. Thank you.
Do you know, Councillor, whether the Village of New Minas has anything in their capital plan regarding this topic?
Well, I don't know where their plan is at, but I think that the county has responsibility for planning, and I'm sure that's covered in our tax rate. I think it's incumbent on us to be stronger in the lead with that planning. And maybe it's in the infrastructure, and like I asked a question generally because we do have some infrastructure studies in a bundle there. So I was trying to see if there's something there, but.
Okay, well, perhaps Mr. Quinn can respond to that.
Yeah. Sorry, I think through you, Mayor, to Councillor Windsor, I think I'm understanding the question a little bit more. I would say it's captured under the asset management capacity building, is that we are providing a certain level of assistance with, or made an offer to provide a certain level of assistance to the villages that have certain assets that help with their planning. But again, it largely comes back to water and sewer would be assets that would be owned by the village, so they would need to take some of the lead on that. We can certainly, I think, make the offer with assisting with their asset management planning, but that's still in the works. And then again, as them as the owners of the particular utilities in question, they would have to take the lead on any subsequent go forward beyond the scope of that particular project.
Okay, thank you. Anything further, Councillor Windsor?
No, I'm just concerned that we're going to lose great opportunities there.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Harding.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, just a question on if we're partner with the First Nations in our community, do we know what percentage or what they're going to put into the spreadsheet as well, or is
That's not known at this time.
that's not known? Okay, just a question. That's all. Thank you.
It's to be hoped that we're equal partners.
Okay.
Yeah. No further questions.
Great. So that leads us into the high-level summary that I promised that may or may not be legible on screen. Basically, we can work our way from the bottom up. I would have presented very briefly the total project financing spread on the example slide that I gave, but total projects have $29,209,000 with overall funding from operating funds or from operating rates, $628,000. Federal and or provincial grants, over $10 million. Contributions from capital reserves, $5.3 million. Operating reserves, $3.4 million. Utilization of long-term debt of $9.5 million, and then other revenues of $206,000. Just quickly jumping back to the long-term debt, as I had indicated previously, that will be reduced as a result of applying 2022-23 surplus against projects that have long-term debt in their capital plans. So anticipate that number comes down. And then working our way up one line, you get to the water utility with total projects of $3.8 million. Small amount relative to what's contemplated from operating reserves or accumulated surplus in long-term debt, but from operations in the year, $209,000, $2.2 million to come from the water utilities accumulated surplus, and $1.3 million from long-term debt. And I should have mentioned earlier something that we're looking at with the Green Water Utility and with the substantial utilization of the accumulated surplus. We are contemplating completing a rate study for the utility, in particular the debt service accumulating over the sort of short-term forecast for the utility may make it difficult to maintain at the current rate. So that is something that's been built into that operating budget, and you'll hear more about next week. Moving up another line, you get to the regional sewer. So once again, I'll reiterate that these projects have been discussed and have been recommended to the partner governance bodies by the regional committee. But those projects total $3,780,000, primarily funded through long-term debt, but there is a contribution from regional sewer capital reserves of $420,000. Moving up another line, there's the municipal sewer with total projects of a little over $11 million. Very small amount from the sewer rate itself at $80,000. Really substantial federal and provincial grant funding at over $6.5 million. Utilization from capital reserves at $2.8 million. a small amount pulling from operating reserves at 95,000, and then $1.4 million of long-term debt contemplated for the sewer system. Then you get your next line up there, the total supported by the tax rate, which is the combination of municipal infrastructure and special projects for a total of $10.5 million, and 300 and almost 40,000 coming from the general tax rate, 3.5 million to come from federal or provincial grants. There is a speculative amount in there built in, especially in related to the solar garden. Capital reserves we look to draw from around $2 million, operating reserves around $1 million, and then long-term debt 3.4 million, and this is probably where you'll likely see the reduction as a result of utilization of prior period surplus. And finally, other revenues of just $206,000. So unless there are broad questions in relation to the capital and project budget, or if there was a desire to revisit any of those categories or project sheets in particular, then I would move to the recommendation slide. I see we have one question.
Yes, question from Councillor Armstrong.
I'm missing something here. At the top of page 9 says continued. Long-term debt. So the total long-term debt that we're looking at in this particular capital budget is 9.5 million. Is that correct?
Correct.
That concerns me. Because I think at the beginning of your presentation, or somewhere in the where I read it, right now we're 6 million. We carry 6 million in debt. Was that not like the first page?
It's presented early in the report. Just allow me one
I
moment.
thought it was like the first page.
Yeah, so
So we're doubling our debt in 1 year.
yes.
More than doubling our debt in 1 year.
That figure is a bit of a misnomer. You may want to look towards the section of the budget book that is not labeled municipal debt, but is labeled long-term debt. The amount that we're anticipating drawing in 23-24 is closer to 8.4 million, but
That doesn't make me feel any better. And you know, you did remark that any surplus that we realized from this fiscal year would go towards, would make that a lesser amount, correct?
correct.
And so I don't suppose there's any way that you can give us any kind of crystal ball as to tell us what kind of a surplus we might be looking at this year.
We've forecasted for 22-23 at 2.1 million.
Okay, so we're still at 6, so we'd be doubling our debt. Okay. And the other thing is the federal grants. Some of them we know we already have, the ICIP, but then there's others, like we talked about the solar, that we don't even know that we would be eligible for or that we would get. So I'm a little concerned with the amount that we're talking about here. So yeah, I just wanted to put that out there. And I do have a question about another page, but I'll leave it at that in case someone just wants to speak to this.
Councillor Windsor?
Yeah, I would like to see staff. I asked questions about the Greenwich traffic transportation study, both active and vehicular, and I've asked about what I thought would be planning projects coming up for the area south of 101. I'm hoping staff will take a look, take those comments back and look at it and see how that can be factored into this capital plan. On one in particular, we got an agreement from the province to participate, and on the other one, we're just submitting our secondary planning strategy with obvious, just stand out as to run-ons to now make things happen and to position ourselves for infrastructure funding. So I'm asking that staff would give those consideration before this comes to council. Thank you.
Councillor. Councillor Armstrong again.
Oh, thank you. I just had a question about page, it would be page 17 in the package that we are given, but it would have been page 14 in the budget book, and it's about depreciation. Is that the one? No, 17. Let's try that one. Okay. Capital reserve, sorry, and accumulated depreciation. What in, just a couple of questions on a couple of those lines. The EMO capital reserve and depreciation speaks directly to tangible assets. What would EMO have as tangible assets?
Unfortunately, I don't know the answer offhand. I would have to go take a look at the records.
Yeah, because I mean, I just thought it was, like, do they have a vehicle? Like, I mean, they don't have a building, they don't have a vehicle. I mean, what would you list as a tangible asset for EMO?
Mr. Quinn may have a response first. Mr. Quinn?
I think through you, Mayor, to Councillor Armstrong, there is a portable server unit that holds some of the records. That's the one I can think of offhand. That'd be a tangible asset, and there may be some smaller support items, I'll say, for when the ECCs operate. But yes, and generally speaking, wouldn't have a whole lot that I'm aware of right at the moment, other than just those two particular items.
Yeah, it's just that it's like $125,000. So
Yeah, I think the one, as I recall, I think the bulk of that is that portable server rack unit.
okay, okay. And my other question is KRRC building. It's not our asset, so why are we carrying the depreciation on it?
The building is within our tangible capital asset schedule.
But you're not carrying it as having a value, correct?
We do not have a
reserve on it.
specifically tied
Okay.
to it.
Okay, that just doesn't make any sense to me. Okay, thank you.
If I may comment.
Doesn't make any sense to her. Mike, if you'd like to respond to...
I'll move on to the long-term debt.
Okay.
I failed to include this in the presentation, but it is certainly quite relevant. Within the section for long-term debt on the following page, page 12, you can see some discussion related to debt thresholds, debt service burden, per capita debt, debt to taxable assessment, and the debt service ratio. So 3 of those are tied into municipal policy for long-term debt, and the other is one of the provincial FCIs. And you can see the forecasted impact of the capital plan on those various thresholds. You can see that the contemplated debt allows us to remain on side with those thresholds, though you can see in particular the debt service burden, debt service ratio, which are very aligned calculations, are getting very near their threshold amounts. Another comment that I'll add in relation to the long-term debt, 2 projects contemplating to draw a rather substantial amount of debt: the regional sewer treatment plant aeration and the production well. I'll start with the production well. That finds itself within the Greenwood water utility, and as I mentioned, we're contemplating the rate study in that area in order to make sure that there's sufficient annual revenue production to handle the debt service load of the utility. So it may make sense to carve that out of the figure that sort of you were analyzing based on. The other being the regional sewer treatment plant aeration project at $3.3 million of debt. And though we carry the full scope of that debt, our contribution to the debt service obligation associated with it is, roughly 22%. The remaining 78% coming from the other partners. So I guess a substantially reduced debt service burden as it relates to that project in particular. So just wanted to add those extra considerations into what you had seen.
Is that helpful, Councillor?
Well, it speaks to the questions that I've been asking all along, is that why our partners' contributions are not showing. Because it speaks to our debt service ratio. And if people are putting money in, we should be able to use that to bring that down. And I don't understand why. I mean, there was other sheets there that said that, the IMSA, it showed our partners' contributions in that. It showed Kingston Water's the Village of Kingston's contribution towards the water study. But when it comes to regional sewer, we're not putting in the amounts that are being given to us by partners. And we're only a 22% partner. So we're carrying it all on our sheets, and it's affecting our ratios, and yet we're not using that to make our numbers look better. And I don't understand why that is, and that's why I keep asking the question. So anyway.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, that prompted a response from Mr. Barr. Mr. Barr?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So you are circling right around a major issue, and it's included as a strategic project in the council strategic plan around advocacy around Section 60 of the MGA. So the issue that you see in terms of contribution from partners with Valley Waste, KTA, places like that, in terms of being structured under an IMSA, the provisions under Section 60 of the MGA doesn't permit the structure of an IMSA that includes a non-government agency or group. So specifically with regional sewer, there's issues associated with PepsiCo in terms of structuring that under that type of an entity. And so we're actually trying to lobby the government more to be able to allow for IMSA structures that would formalize that and have a body corporate that would allow that to kind of function similar to other entities and would reflect better in terms of our participation. But in the absence of that, the structure for regional sewer is that one municipal unit is the principal owner, has to have the assets on their books, has to be accountable for it, and just has service arrangements and service agreements with each of the entities. So that's why there's such a complexity with regional sewer, and you may have already known that, but I wanted to just clarify that that arrangement is very much a workaround the limitations that are currently within the MGA.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No further questions.
So the recommendation that Committee of the Whole receive the 2023/24 capital and project budget presentation for information.
It's been recommended the Committee of the Whole, we move the Committee of the Whole receive the 23-24 capital and project budget presentation for information. Do I have a move for the motion? Councillor Armstrong, seconded by Councillor Meisner. Discussion on the motion? No discussion. All those in favor or otherwise, please vote now. The motion passes unanimously. Councillor Windsor being out of his seat at the moment. Thank you, Mike, for your presentation. Is there any further business to come before the meeting? No further business. There's no public present. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Meisner, seconded by Councillor Granger. All those in favor or otherwise, please vote now. The motion passes almost unanimously. Councillor Hurdle wishes to stay for the rest of the afternoon. But we're going, Councillor Hurdle. Motion passes. Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for your input. Thanks, Mike, for your presentation.